Good morning and welcome to the webinar on rapid assessment survey methods. For welcome remarks, we have Maria Hines, Chief of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Unit, OID from CICAD.
Seems like Maria we just lost Maria. So maybe you can do some housekeeping, Paula, and maybe introduce yourself too so we know who you are.
Yes, thank you, Pernell. Thank you for the reminder. I'm
Yeah.
Paula De Masi. I'm also part of the OID team. So for today, we're going to have two panelists, Terence Fountain and Leanne Bonner. After that, we're going to have some questions and comments. You can drop your questions or comments on the chat box on the Zoom app. We are going to share a QR code for an evaluation of the webinar, so you can help us make better webinars on the future. And I see that Maria.
I have returned. Thank you. And perhaps we should get started before I lose my connection again.
Yes, please, Maria, go ahead with your welcome remarks. As I was saying, Maria Hines, Chief of the Inter-American Observatory on Drugs, OID from CICAD.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And let me begin by thanking both the government of Italy and the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs for supporting the project on strengthening early warning systems on drugs, which this event today forms a part. National Drug Observatories, or NDOs, play a critical role in our collective response to emerging and evolving drug threats, and this project provides critical support to them. I would also like to warmly welcome the representatives of National Drug Observatories and related stakeholders from across the Caribbean. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. The purpose of today's event is to sensitize you to the Rapid Assessment Survey, or RAS methodology, and to encourage its use alongside other innovative and cost-effective approaches for collecting drug-related data and information. As you all know, the drug problem has changed dramatically with the emergence of synthetic drugs and new psychoactive substances, and it continues to evolve at a rapid pace. Recent studies in 4 Caribbean countries show that many are already witnessing increased trafficking and consumption of synthetic drugs such as MDMA, often referred to as ecstasy or Molly in your jurisdictions. To a lesser extent, we've also seen early warning system alerts from the Caribbean related to methamphetamine, synthetic cannabinoids, and semi-synthetic cannabinoids. For several years now, CICAD and the Inter-American Observatory on Drugs have been promoting the development and use of early warning systems. We are pleased to note 7 Caribbean member states, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname now have operational early warning systems on drugs, and many of them are actively issuing alerts on new and emerging threats. We very much look forward to supporting the development of additional EWS in the region. At the same time, we recognize a significant challenge. Very few drug prevalence surveys are currently being conducted, and in many cases, national data that are available are outdated or no longer fit for purpose. We fully understand the constraints that countries face, but if there's ever a moment when continuous and timely surveillance of the drug problem was essential, it is now. For this reason, the OID has been encouraging national drug observatories to explore more innovative and resource-efficient ways to gather data needs to inform policy and practice. Today's event is about putting that message into action by introducing you to one such approach, the Rapid Assessment Survey methodology. We have used this methodology successfully on multiple occasions, and we believe it is particularly well suited to contexts where resources are limited and the drug landscape is changing quickly. Our hope is that this event will equip you not only to consider RAS as part of your data collection strategies, but to actually implement these studies in your own countries. The more timely and relevant data we have, the better positioned we are to understand and respond to the drug problem. While CCAD and the OID may not always be able to provide direct financial support, we remain fully committed to providing technical assistance and to connecting you with peers who have the skills and experience needed to implement RAS studies. In that spirit, I would like to sincerely thank Mr. Terrence Fountain and Ms. Anne-Lee Bonaire for generously agreeing to share their expertise with us today. I also want to thank Pernell Clark and Paula Damasi for their efforts in organizing this event on behalf of CCAD and OID. I very much look forward to the presentations and hearing your feedback on how we can collectively strengthen the gathering of drug-related data in the Caribbean. Thank you, and I wish you all a very productive session.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now, please, Pernell Clark, Research Specialist of OID CCAD.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you very much, Maria. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to all participants, and I would like to especially welcome our panelists for today's session, which I will moderate. And as Paula said, we will have two presentations, the first by Terrence Fontaine, who is, you see in the program, epidemiologist. He's many things. He is the immediate past director of the National Anti-Drug Secretariat in the Bahamas. Before that, he was head of the observatory. Before that, he led the epidemiological unit in the Ministry of Health. And he has worked with many of the countries that are participating here, supporting their research on drugs for decades, literally decades. So welcome, Terry. Thank you for being here. And I also want to welcome Leanne Bonaire. Leanne is no stranger to many of you. Leanne is from Trinidad. She has worked recently as a consultant for CCAD in one of the studies that Maria referenced in her opening remarks. She led the study in Trinidad and Tobago, and she has done multiple studies in Trinidad and elsewhere, supporting countries as they collect and generate data on drugs and other topics. I know, Leanne, you're currently working on your PhD. I hope that is going well. And I want to thank you for agreeing to share your experiences here with the team. And I would really hope that the participants, those who have experience with rapid assessment surveys, are able to take the floor during the Q&A and also share some of their experiences as well. I know we have some good experiences, recent experiences among you. So please feel free to share them with us at the appropriate time. And without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Terrence Fontaine to present an introduction to the Rapid Assessment Survey methodology for collecting data and information on the drug problem. Terrence, you have the floor.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay. And can you see the screen?
Yeah, we see the screen. It's in presentation mode. I think you are good to go.
Okay, good. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Maria, and thank you, Pernell. Good to see you too, Leanne. My job this morning, I think, should be pretty easy. We should have some fun this morning. As Pernell mentioned, I think we do have a lot of experience out there, particularly over the past 10 years or so with conducting rapid situational assessments. One of the first things I want to say right at the very beginning is we call it the rapid assessment survey this morning. The UNODC calls it rapid situational assessment. And so if you hear me going in between rapid situational assessments and rapid assessment surveys, it's the same thing. I actually prefer the term rapid situational assessment because it's really ideal for assessing situations. So with that said, it'll be RSA or RAS, whichever you choose. This presentation introduces the rapid assessment methodology as applied to the drug-related issues, and I'm going to actually align my presentation with the United Nations Office on Drug Control's Rapid Assessment and Response Framework. The focus this morning is on how rapid assessment surveys can generate timely, actionable evidence to inform policy, programming, and operational responses in dynamic drug contexts. And you'll be hearing this statement about information assessment for action throughout the presentation. As Maria already hinted at, in many settings, routine data systems do not capture rapid changes in drug markets or patterns of use. And the rapid situation assessments are designed to address these information gaps and strengthen the link between assessment and response. So, what exactly is a rapid situation assessment? And I know some of you already know all of this already, so just bear with me. A rapid situation assessment is a short-term, systematic process for gathering and analyzing information on a very specific drug situation. It does not aim to produce prevalence estimates, as a lot of us are used to, for example, with all of the household and school surveys that we have been doing. It does not aim to do that. It does not produce prevalence estimates, but rather to develop a practical understanding of current patterns, behaviors, and harms to support immediate decision making. I said you're going to hear this over and over again. Rapid assessments addressed urgent information gaps, and there are a lot, as I think we all can agree with, particularly here in the Caribbean. And so, again, as I've already said, with the rapid assessment methodology, it's a systematic but quick assessment. The methodology uses multiple data sources, and we're going to get in that in a lot more detail. It is designed to inform immediate decision making. So you don't just collect information for report purposes to put on the shelf. If you're going to be getting involved in a rapid assessment survey, you want to actually use it to resolve a situation that is pressing. And the methodology emphasizes practical intelligence and not prevalence estimates. So, what are some of the purposes of a rapid assessment survey? Rapid assessment surveys ideally can be used to identify patterns of drug use and distribution. Rapid assessment surveys can be used to understand affected populations and risk behaviors. And we're going to get a lot more information on that as we move along. Rapid assessment surveys can be used to assess health, social, and legal impacts. And as an example, what are the harms associated with drugs? What are the consequences of drug abuse in specific settings? Again, all things that the rapid assessment survey can be used for. And it can also be used to inform timely interventions and policy responses. Now, I just gave you a broad outline of what rapid assessment surveys can be utilized for. What this slide shows is some of the more very specific reasons that we can actually use rapid assessment surveys to answer. For example, I'll just read a couple of them: determining the magnitude and characteristics of the drug abuse problem in a given setting, studying the harmful health consequences of drug abuse. And that one seems to be of interest to a lot of persons recently when we're looking at the impact of drugs on communities. It can be used to determine the availability and adequacy of drug abuse treatment. It can be used to ascertain the availability of community resources that could be mobilized for interventions related to drug abuse. And rapid assessment surveys can also answer designing strategies that be used for designing strategies that respond to the needs of various target populations. So I'm sure the presentation will be shared with all of you. So I just wanted to share a couple of those very specific topics that rapid assessment surveys can be utilized for. Again, as I said at the outset, I'm actually presenting utilizing the United Nations framework. And so it is recommended by the UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, that ideally rapid assessment surveys should be used for the assessment of new or emerging substances. We have this challenge in our region. We have the new psychoactive substances, we have the leans, we have the gummies. And so if you want to find out more about some of these new or emerging substances, who's taking it, how they're taking it, access to it, again, the rapid assessment methodology is ideal for such a situation. In addition, it's also recommended when there are rapid changes in drug markets. Again, as we said, the new psychoactive substances offers this opportunity for us to utilize the rapid assessment methodology. It is recommended when we see a sudden increase, see a lot of persons showing up at the accident emergency department or elsewhere as a result of some sort of overdose or exposure. And it also is recommended, I think as Maria mentioned at the outset, when there is a very weak or outdated routine data collection systems. And speaking to Purnell prior, one of the concerns was when we look at, for example, the school surveys that were conducted in the region, quite a number of these surveys, and the more recent of these surveys, are well over 10 years in the past. And so should we actually be using those with our planning and programming at this point in time? Do they still reflect the current situation? They may in some instances, but then they may not. And so utilizing rapid assessment surveys can actually fill that gap, particularly with respect to providing current information on the drug situation in specific geographic locations. Rapid situation assessments also balance, you have to balance speed with the methodological rigor. While it is not an epidemiological or highly scientific approach, it can provide very useful information, and then it can provide that information rather quickly. But you have to balance the amount of effort and work that you're putting into it, and the time it's actually with the time it's actually taken to get some of that information. And so when we talk about the types of information later on in the presentation, this will be, I think, made a bit more clearly. Again, as I said, the rapid assessment methodology, one of the other principles is the necessity for utilize multiple data sources. The entire rapid assessment approach is based on this very thing, these principles right here. I would think the triangulation, which is the use of multiple data sources, is probably the most important principle for the use of rapid assessment surveys. The methodology is quite flexible. You can use it to study almost anything. When you really think about a needs assessment, comprehensive needs assessment, again, that is a rapid assessment approach. Like I said, it can be used to study just about anything more specifically in different situations, different populations. It can be used for treatment, prevention, as already mentioned in a few slides ago, it can also be utilized for law enforcement issues, for prison issues. So it's extremely flexible, and it's very pragmatic in the kinds of information that it gathers from it. This is useful information that can be directly applied to programming and projects. Of course, with any type of research or assessment, ethical issues remains something at the forefront. And in this particular case, yes, we have to take ethical issues into consideration and use the do no harm approach. We got to understand that using the rapid approach, we may still end up with researchers in the field that will be exposed to some things. There's also risk to some of the persons that we're targeting in the survey, risk of stigma, arrest, because drugs is an interesting topic. And we have some strict laws out there that could jeopardize those persons that we're targeting for information. All right, so let's get into it. So the first order of business is the planning of the rapid situation assessment. Okay, and as in any types of planning, once you would have conceptualized whatever information you'd have been looking at or were exposed to, and you think you've identified a problem, and you want to investigate more of the problem, and at the end of the day, do something about it. You identify the problem, you assess the problem as to risk protective factors. Once you identify those issues impacting the problem, you ask yourself the question, does this problem actually exist here? Utilizing all the available information that you have available to you. And once you do that, you want to prioritize the problem, and then you come up with your objectives that you wish to study. And you go ahead and you implement that, or you use your short-term objectives to design an action plan, and then you implement. The rapid situation assessment is no different. It's basically you treat it the same way as you would any other quote unquote study or assessment or survey, but it has a lot of components to it. And so that is the main difference because of the numerous sources of information that you're going to be pulling into the rapid assessment survey. So when we're talking about planning the rapid assessment survey, the first phase, of course, is defining the problem. Planning begins by clearly defining why the rapid situation assessment is being conducted. This usually follows a trigger such as an emerging drug trend, something you would have noticed, increasing harm or insufficient data. At this stage, it's critical to clarify how the findings will be used, as this will shape all subsequent planning decisions. So once we define the problem, then as I mentioned earlier, then we have to identify what are the objectives that we are looking to get answers for. What are the key questions? Clear and focused objectives guide the assessment. Clear and focused objectives guide the assessment, because you always have to look at the results in relation to what it is that you intended to do. Objectives should be limited in number and achievable within a rapid time frame. Key questions are developed to address priority issues such as substances in use, affected populations, patterns of use, harms, and existing responses. It doesn't make sense to come up with an objective where it may require, for example, a year of data going forward. It's just not timely. So phase 3, so we've defined our problem. We've come up with our objectives. Now, what we want to do is sharpen the scope and focus of the rapid assessment survey. The scope determines where and among whom the assessment will be conducted. This includes geographic coverage, priority populations, and the time frame of interest. A clearly defined scope helps ensure the assessment remains focused and feasible. In the Bahamas, we're a little different from a lot of the islands. We literally have close to 30 inhabited islands. And as you would imagine, the services that are available on some islands do not exist on others. And so it's important for us to know what is available with respect to particularly drug prevention and treatment in these other islands where we know that a lot of the services don't exist. What is the situation and what is it that they have to do in the event that something related to drug abuse is required? And so the rapid assessment approach would be ideal, and we've actually used it that way here in the Bahamas. So once you clarified and fine-tuned the scope, you know where you're going to do your study, who you're going to focus. The next thing is to identify who the stakeholders are and the specific roles of each stakeholder. Stakeholders are those persons who are going to be involved at every step of the way. And so you notice a problem, you have your objectives, you want your stakeholders to help you fine tune everything from prioritizing what you approach, which risk protective factors you approach, right on through to the implementation, and in coming up and fine tuning the conclusions and the recommendations at the very end of the project. So the stakeholders has to be involved at every, or it is ideally recommended that they be involved at every step of the way. Relevant stakeholders identified, including government institutions, service providers, civil society organizations, and community representatives. Roles and responsibilities are clarified to support coordination, accountability, and efficient implementation of the assessment. So it's not only the stakeholders, not only those persons who helped to do, it is also can be the beneficiaries, the funding agencies. These are all key stakeholders. So now it's time for the implementation, which is the methods that we will employ in the use of the rapid situation assessment. Appropriate methods and data sources are selected based on the objectives and the scope. UNODC rapid assessment surveys rely on triangulation, which combines secondary data with qualitative methods and, if needed, rapid quantitative methods. I talked earlier about trying to avoid where you would need to collect data for a year. However, when we talk about rapid quantitative methods, you may be able to get a snapshot by simply looking at persons coming in for service over a period of a week, a month, very short term. As I mentioned earlier, in any research, ethics is going to be an issue, and safety as well, particularly if you're going to have persons going out into the field to collect data. Ethical considerations are integrated from the outset. This includes informed consent. Persons should be aware of exactly what you're doing, and more importantly, or just as importantly, what is it that you're looking to do at the end. And so when they make a decision to volunteer and to participate, they are aware of every aspect of what it is that you're trying to do. So ethical considerations are integrated from the outset. And this includes, like I said, informed consent, confidentiality. They have to believe, all right, that what is said to them and what they say, more importantly, what they say to you will remain confidential and will only be used exactly in the manner that is described in the rapid assessment, which is for the purposes of the rapid assessment, no other reason. And so confidentiality is key. Again, we're dealing with drugs. As you're going to see later, one of the groups that you may be targeting may be drug users. And some of the information that they can give, accessibility to drugs, ease of access to drugs, could be useful to law enforcement. And so again, confidentiality in a situation like what we're involved in is key. And again, we have to manage the risk. So safety considerations for both participants and researchers are assessed and managed throughout the assessment. So we're now talking about just the planning stage. And what this is saying that you have to take these things into consideration before you even start. This has to be a part of the planning. How are you going to protect the persons in the field? How are you going to maintain confidentiality? Okay. The next phase is the logistics and resources. If anybody's ever done a logical framework, this is the part where the logical framework comes into play. And so once you've identified what activities that is going to be required in the assessment, then we're now talking about looking at specific timelines tied to each of the activities, the budget associated with the activities, access to the resources that you anticipate that you will need, and of course, data management. And so, like I said, this phase translates plans into operational arrangements, timelines, budgets, access to sites, and data management procedures are all finalized before you begin. Clear logistical planning ensures the assessment can be conducted efficiently within available resources. One of the things I always give an example of is you need to, for example, utilize a consultant for whatever reason that may not be available. Do you postpone what the consultant is supposed to do? Do you get another consultant, which may change the budget, which may change the timeline? You may have to go international. And so again, all of these things has to be thought of prior to the commencement of the rapid assessment survey during the planning phase. And who is going to be the team members to carry out the rapid assessment survey? Bear in mind, there's a lot of things taking place simultaneously. And so one or two persons is not going to get it done. And so you have to think for each of these activities, who is going to be the persons responsible for the activities related to that action. The assessment team is briefed and trained on objectives, methods, on ethical standards, and data collection tools. This ensures a shared understanding among the team members that supports consistency and in the quality of the data. Also, be taken into consideration during the planning phase is how the information collected will be validated and reporting. Plans are made for validating findings through the triangulation methods, and where appropriate, stakeholder review, where, as a matter of fact, persons will look and either agree, and these are key stakeholders, persons quite possibly with experience in research as well. Reporting formats, key outputs, and target audiences are defined to ensure findings are accessible and usable. Who needs to know what? What do the policymakers need to know? What do the funders need to know? What does the community need to know? What does the beneficiaries need to know? And so your communication strategy, all of that, right, needs to be included in this. And then finally, with respect to the planning for the rapid assessment situation, the link to the response. Remember, from the outset, if we're going to do a rapid assessment survey, it is to address a problem that needs to be solved rather quickly. So from the planning stage, the rapid assessment survey is linked to the action that is to be taken. This phase ensures that findings inform immediate or short-term programmatic service or policy actions. So something is going to get done. Something is going to be addressed. Assessment and response are understood as a part of a continuous cycle in this. That's a quick roadmap of the planning process for conducting a rapid situational assessment, which is really no different from if you're doing another survey. Just that it's going to be a lot of more things happening simultaneously. So now it's time to we got our plans, now it's time to implement. So where do we start? Okay. Let's look at the methodology that we will be using. All right. So included here, we'll just quickly discuss data collection, the study population, data analysis, validation, interpretation again, and the kinds of recommendations coming out of the rapid assessment survey. So we now defining key questions. We know what it is that we're trying to tackle. We know what the objectives are. Now, what are the key questions that we have to come up with to get answers for? Key questions guide the entire assessment process. Typical questions focus on what substances are used, who is using them, how and where use occurs, what harms are associated, and what services or responses already exist. Questions should be realistic given the rapid nature of the assessment. So, for example, what drugs are used and available? Now with the advent of the new psychoactive substances, ready access to these things, changing beliefs regarding the harms associated with various drugs and the frequency with which these drugs are taken. There are a lot of changes that we're faced, those of us involved in this field. And so one of the questions that you can ask is what drugs are used and how available are these drugs? Increased availability, increased access is tied to increased use. And so it's important for us to know this information. Who uses them and how? Age groups, certain cohorts, certain ethnic groups, who are using these, certain communities, where, what harms are occurring as a result of the usage of these drugs. And it may not be directly related to the intake or an overdose, but harms to the community, the violence associated with it. Again, all of these will shape some sort of action to be taken to address it. And then what responses already exist. In a situation like this, you really would have to do a very comprehensive stakeholder analysis, identifying who out there is doing what organizations are addressing prevention, is treatment available for persons who will need it. So these are just some of the key questions that you can ask in relation to the objective, the clear objective that you have for your situation and assessment. So data collection. We've been talking a bit about this already, but when we're talking about triangulation, in essence, what triangulation is like I said, the use of different types of information, multiple sources of data. And we use the word triangulation because you're looking to see whether the results from one particular data source agrees with the results from another data source. Is recommendations or referrals for treatment, is that reflecting the number of persons in treatment? Just because you refer don't mean you go, and if you want to go, the facility just may not be able to handle it. And so when we talking about triangulation, it's looking to see whether or not what we see here is also supported by information coming from different sources. So if you can imagine a triangle, for example, with survey data, administrative data that we would collect, for example, when you go to the hospital or to a treatment facility, and data from another source, and you have now this triangle, and you have information that you see coming from this source. Is that also supported by the information from the information at the other two points of the triangle? So triangulation basically refers to the combination of multiple data sources. You want to cross-validate the findings. That's how you're looking to see if one supports the other or whether or not it refutes it. No single source is sufficient in a rapid situation assessment. Let's go back to some of the key issues that we talked about earlier. And I was saying probably the number one issue here that we need to take into consideration is multiple data sources. So no single source is sufficient. And again, there's a very strong emphasis on triangulation. I don't know how I'm doing with time, so I'll just try to speed up a bit here. In terms of data collection, one of the sources of information that you will be utilizing heavily in a rapid situation assessment is secondary data. What exactly is secondary data? Here's a list of some of the examples of what we call secondary data. Any policy documents in respect of drug abuse prevention and treatment. For example, do you have a policy on issues related to drugs in schools? What happens in a particular case if a student is found to be using drugs or what have you? Is there a policy on prevention programs within the schools? Because if you're going to assess that, you're going to be assessing what's actually taking place, what's currently taking place with respect to following these policies in relation to the policy itself. So if you have written policy documents, those can be quite useful. You may have to look at certain laws related to alcohol, drinking and driving, laws related to drugs. This is very important, and like I said, because ignorance can lead to putting the target population of drug users at risk. So we need to be aware of the drug laws in the geographic areas that we're conducting the rapid assessment survey. And again, you might want to know about laws related to tobacco, depending on what your study is. In addition, other secondary data can include standards. I know those of us who were involved in COPALAD have been looking at treatment standards, standards for treatment services, prevention services. Those would be key, all right, because you may see some issues that could have been addressed by the standards, but either the standards are not being followed. So again, very important source of information. Of course, health and treatment data, such as hospital records, law enforcement and seizure data. And again, we are talking about information coming from the police lab, the drug enforcement units, arrests, convictions, information in the prison, number of persons admitted to the prison for particular types of drugs, customs and their involvement with seizures, and the types of method that is being used for trafficking. Again, a rich source of secondary data, depending on what your objectives are, that you may want to tap into. Of course, existing studies. You always want to be aware of what studies relevant to the topic of interest has already been conducted. For us, we have the UN, the WHO surveys that also look at drugs, in addition to those that we do in the region, utilizing the CCAD methodology. And other reports have been done over the years. Also reports by non-government organizations, research reports, and also media. Rich source of information related to captures and also early warning data for those of us who do have these formal early warning systems. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the secondary data that you may require. At the end of this presentation, which I'm not going to share today, but you will have access to it. I have some more detailed information, for example, on exactly what secondary data you can access from different agencies. So that's secondary data. Very important to rapid assessment surveys is use of the qualitative assessment. Generally speaking, when we talk about qualitative assessments, there are a few more, but the main ones are key informant interviews. And when we're talking about key informant interviews, we're talking about persons with rich knowledge of the subject of interest, or rich knowledge of something related to the objectives, where there's extreme value in sitting down and, like we like to say, picking that person's brain. Then, of course, you can utilize focus groups where you get a cross section of opinions. And it's interesting. We used to hold somewhat of a focus group back in the day, completing the ARQ when we were offered the opportunity in those instances where you didn't have hard data. It allowed you to get a consensus opinion of a particular question. And so it was useful for that as well. And then qualitative methods also involve community and site observations, just being there and seeing and observing for yourself. Okay. One of the things I want to highlight is who are these key informants? And this is just an example of who some of these key informants can be. Former and current drug abusers that are still up to date on what's going on with respect to what new things may be on the market. For example, you may have a bartender in a club that is frequented by young persons who evidence suggests are involved in the use of specific substances, and particularly the new psychoactive substances. Health professionals, doctors, nurses, drug treatment personnel, all have a rich amount of information that they can impart in helping us to understand this particular situation that we're studying. Other helpful professionals, counselors, particularly those in the schools, social workers, those involved in reinsertion and challenges there, psychologists, outreach workers, community-based prevention or other community-based program personnel, all key informants that you may want to tap into. Law enforcement personnel, of course, personnel charged with drug control, prison officials, prison guards, lawyers, judges, police, teachers, particularly for school-based challenges. They would have a good understanding of what is taking place in the school, along with the guidance counselors. And of course, those persons who spend a lot of time on the street vendors, street children, sex workers, taxi drivers, all excellent key informants. And the third method we're talking about in terms of the types of data is if in the event you need rapid quantitative methods. Short surveys. You might be familiar with the term pulse surveys, where you may receive a survey with about 5 to 10 questions. But it is very, very specific. It just wants your opinion maybe on one or two things, and that's it. And so, using internet research methodology like SurveyMonkey, for example, can give you this information in a very short period of time. And you can use it for specific pulse surveys for specific target groups. And so this is what we call the rapid quantitative methods, because it's going to allows you numbers. You can do service utilization snapshots, as I mentioned earlier. If you don't have any reliable utilization data, you might want to just collect useful information that may be useful to you over a period of a week or a month, depending on the amount of usage and whether the information would be useful. And then simple mapping exercises. What do we think about when we talk about mapping exercises? Well, again, you can map everything. Like I said, I live in the Bahamas. We got about 30 inhabited islands. Everything is not equal across the islands. And so, for example, I might want to look at seizures across the Bahamas to see where drugs may be coming into. So one of the things I might want to look at is the number of seizures, and then probably categorize them into, say, 5 categories. Low risk, high risk, or low number of seizures, high number of seizures, depending on which category you fall in. And that helps us to prioritize where we want to focus on. And the same thing can apply to violence related to drug use. What are some of the hotspots? And so you can actually map any of these things that will quickly allow persons to see where the high risk areas are that you may wish to target. So quantitative tools are used in a rapid and descriptive manner. These may include short surveys or service utilization counts. UNODC RSAs do not aim to generate statistically representative estimates, and that's important, but rather to complement qualitative findings and to strengthen triangulation. All right. And so these are the information that we collect like this is not going to be representative of any particular population. Now, priority populations and informants. Rapid survey assessments, rapid situation assessments engage a range of stakeholders, including people who use drugs, of course, service providers, outreach workers, and law enforcement. This multi-sectoral perspective helps capture different dimensions of the drug situation and improve the relevance of the findings. I need to say that utilizing the triangulation method does not necessarily mean that what you're saying is the truth. But the more information you look at that is showing something similar, okay, is sufficient, may be sufficient for you to act on, or to decide that, well, let me do something more detailed in investigating that. All right. So you can do everything right. All right. But still, it may not be the case. Priority populations informants, people who use drugs, service providers, community leaders, right? Multi-sectoral perspective. As I mentioned earlier, any research you do, there's a ethical component to it. And in this particular case, it's the same. Okay, ethical considerations are fundamental. Participation must be voluntary. Don't trick them into it. Don't lie to them. Informed consent must be obtained. Informed, which means they are informed about what it is that you're doing, what they will be doing. That is important. And confidentiality, as I mentioned earlier, must be ensured. Assessments should avoid reinforcing stigma or exposing participants to legal or social harm. And this is in line with UNODC's rights-based approach. Again, you got persons going out into the field, collecting data. They, given the type of persons and the type of areas they're going in, they can be at risk. In the planning phase, we spoke about this. What are we going to do to protect them? The persons you're collecting information from, information that they share with you may get them killed or arrested. What are we going to do to ensure that doesn't happen and to make sure that they know as a result of working with you, it doesn't happen. So it's, addressing these ethical issues are extremely important. Um, and so you want to avoid harm and stigma. And you have to be sensitive to cultural nuances and differences. I have in brackets here social inclusion because social inclusion requires the involvement of all persons who can be affected by a research or a project to be involved in the planning from the outset. And I put this here because if you have persons from different cultures involved with you from the outset in the planning of these things, you will have that opportunity to be sensitized to cultural differences and nuances that can threaten the success of your effort. And so you need to take that in consideration. As I said, safety is an issue, and so risk management includes protecting both participants and researchers. This may involve careful site selection, security planning, and clear protocols for handling sensitive information. Safety considerations should be integrated throughout the assessment process. A lot of instances doing surveys, we ask that one person don't go by themselves. Go with minimum of two for the researchers, and so again is just being aware of these issues and these challenges, and mitigating the potential safety and risk management. We got all this data, so what next? Now it's time to analyze the data. Analysis focuses on identifying patterns, themes, and gaps across data sources. Qualitative data are analyzed thematically, while quantitative data are summarized descriptively. The emphasis is on generating clear, actionable insights rather than exhaustive analysis. This is the rapid approach. Thematic analysis of qualitative data. Imagine you do a short qualitative survey. You got 30 persons answer, and you have an open-ended question or one or two open-ended questions. And so you have possibly 30 open-ended responses. What do you do with that? In essence, what you do is you go through and you look for recurrent themes, things that is mentioned often, and you categorize based on those things. I can spend a lot more time talking about the analysis of qualitative data, but generally, and once you've done that, you can then do what is called a content analysis, and you may even be able to say with the content analysis how often something is said. In terms of any quantitative data that you collect, again, it's the routine descriptives, such as the number of persons, percentage, range, average. And then what you want to do, once you have this different types of information coming back, here comes the triangulation. Now you want to synthesize qualitative and quantitative findings. Does one support the other? That will strengthen any conclusion and recommendations emanating from the rapid situation assessment. Then you want to identify patterns, gaps, and also any contradictions. So you're not looking to see what supports what, whether or not information from this particular source supports what we see from that particular source, but also whether or not there are any contradictions and explanations for the contributions, the contradictions. Validation and interpretation, again, cross-checking the findings is what I've been talking about all along the way. If we want to draw conclusions based on all of the information that we have, you don't want to conclude something based on just one data source alone in a rapid situation assessment. You want to see once you draw your conclusions, what you may be seeing in treatment. You may also be seeing in law enforcement. You may be getting a hint at it through surveillance. And so you want to cross-check your findings because this is going to strengthen your conclusions. Remember now, at the end of the day, with actions to be taken as a result of this, we're now talking about spending money to implement projects and programs. And so you want to be as sure as you possibly can that your conclusions are correct, and the recommendations emanating from it is valid. And so stakeholder validation, where you can bring persons in and get their opinions. And then you want to assess consistency across the data sources. Just generally speaking, again, like I said, you'll have access to this, but the primary focus of attention in drug abuse rapid assessment survey generally falls within these four broad categories. A contextual assessment, which describes the structural, social, and cultural factors. Drug use assessment, as we've been talking about. A rapid assessment survey may look specifically at a resource assessment, require resource assessments, mainly at the identification of existing resources, such as various government and specialized services, things related to that. And it may focus on intervention and policy assessment. In some instances, and I've been involved in some in the past, where the rapid assessment survey was pretty broad, and the objectives required all of these. Contextual assessment, as well as drug assessment, resource assessment, as well as an intervention and policy assessment. And so, again, you will have access to this. You can take a look at that. What are the key outputs of a rapid situation assessment? Again, it's going to be tied directly to the objectives that you would have put together for yourself at the very beginning. But the key outputs would generally include portrayal of the nature and extent of the drug use and abuse problem in a given setting. And that's going to be important in a given setting, situational. Identification of new patterns of drug abuse, such as drug injecting. This is what you're going to get out of your rapid assessment survey. The identification of risk behaviors that you would want to tackle and the harms related to drug abuse. It will give you service gaps and also barriers to service. What interventions have taken place or are needed to deal with the harmful health consequences of drug abuse. It will help you, of course, to identify priority needs And this will lead to, and it will give you intermediate and strengthen your intermediate and short-term recommendations. Again, intermediate and short-term is because the whole idea behind doing the rapid approach is to sort of quickly do something about the problem that you would have identified in the first instance. And again, this is just, again, putting emphasis on what we're doing from assessment to response. And so at the end of the day, to encourage and ensure that something takes place, once you have the report, you want to inform your harm reduction and treatment providers so they can be aware, and start thinking about what it is that specifically can be done to address this information that was shared with them. The need to adjust service delivery if the results requires that. You will gain strong support for policy and planning with the results. For example, resource allocation. I always think about when we talk about the public health approach to drug control versus the judiciary or the legal approach. And persons talk about public health, but the distribution of or the allotment of the funding doesn't change. It still goes to law enforcement. And so when we talk about the public health approach, are we actually investing in that? Can we come up with information to show that that's not happening? And it should. So again, and finally, in communicating findings to decision makers. Each and every one of us are advocates in our own way. And sitting on information is not going to help anyone. Policymakers are decision makers. And remember, during the planning, we talked about the communication strategy. What is the information that is going to be required at all levels, but particularly in this particular instance for decision makers who will have to say in whether or not the results are sufficient enough for action, to warrant action, and then to make the resources available to carry those actions out. So that's very important. Of course, while the Rapid Assessment Survey is an extremely useful tool, it also has limitations. Findings are not representative, and they reflect a specific point in time. Biases may be present, particularly in self-reported data. If you ask in drug users about use, they may overestimate or they might underestimate, depending on what they're thinking at the time and whether or not they trust you. Rapid surveys should therefore be seen as complementary to longer-term monitoring and research. So again, it's any research or supportive, quantitative is not going to be representative. It's again limited to time for in-depth analysis. Potential biases will exist, and then there's going to be the need for follow-up studies. So this is pretty much it for me. This is the end. And so what are the key takeaways? If nothing else, rapid situation assessments are fast. They can be done rather quickly. They're flexible. They can research. The methodology can be used for assessing just about anything. And it's action oriented. It's designed to give you information to use to address that problem and address that problem rather quickly. It's best suited for emerging, urgent, or underdocumented drug issues. It is extremely helpful in planning. Ethics and triangulation are absolutely essential, and findings should lead directly to action. So, with that said, I hope I didn't bore you too much. I didn't want to give you too much details, just to create an awareness if you're going to be doing a rapid situational assessment or rapid assessment survey, as you want to call it. What are some of the key things that you have to take into consideration? So, I want to thank you all for putting up with me this morning, and I do appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Terrence, for that. What I thought was a very good overview of the rapid situation assessment, however you want to call it, methodology. Yeah, this was very good. While you were presenting, I was thinking whether I've ever seen um, sort of a distillation of the RAS methodology. And I don't think I've ever seen it before, actually, which is strange, having been exposed to it for such a long time and actually using it. But there are a couple of things I want to highlight. In addition to your very last slide, the key takeaways, um, I thought the definition that you gave was very, very clear. The RAS, a systematic but quick assessment of some sort of a drug situation, usually an emerging or new situation. I thought the emphasis on the use of multiple data sources throughout the presentation was important, which leads to triangulation, of course. It informs decision making. And you mentioned that again in your last slide. That's the key. And it emphasizes the use of available practical information and intelligence. I loved the roadmap where you went through definition of purpose, the objective, scope, stakeholders, methods, ethics. I'm glad you spent some time on ethics. I think that's very, very important. We tend to think about that as an afterthought. If we don't need to get permission from institutional review board, we usually put ethics to the side, which we should not. So I'm glad you spent some time on that. Logistics and resources, also very important. Even though the rapid assessment survey methodology is cheaper than traditional epidemiological surveys, it doesn't mean that it costs zero. There are time, personnel, and financial implications for doing a rapid situation assessment. So be prepared for that. You spoke also about preparing the team in terms of training them, briefing them, making sure everyone is on the same page, as you do in any other survey. You spoke about validation and reporting, and then linking it to a response. And then my favorite slide of all was your slide number 21, where you basically outline the raison d'etre of the rapid situation assessment, from assessment to response. You're doing it to shed light on a problem, and you're doing it so that you can take action to solve, or at least attempt to solve or mitigate that problem. So thank you very much, Terrence, for that comprehensive presentation. And without further ado, I would like to invite Leanne Bonner to present her experiences in carrying out rapid situation assessments. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Pernal, and thanks so much, Terry, for setting the stage in terms of all of the definitions and providing us with, a clear and comprehensive approach for navigating different RSEs. So just one second, let me get my slide up. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Yes?
Good to go.
Okay, great. So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I know that many of you, we have worked together in the past. I am Leanne Waldrop-Bonnet, and I'll be taking you through rapid situational assessments from a field perspective. So, as Pernell indicated, I worked with OAS on a few projects, drug-related projects, and I also did some work with Copilad and PAHO as well. This morning, just to give you a brief overview of how the presentation will run, I'll just briefly touch on the background of RSAs, given that Terence would have expanded a bit on key features and ethical issues. I'll also briefly engage in some of those areas, key features and ethical issues, and then I'll jump into strengths and challenges. Following which, I'll delve a bit deeper into our approach, the approach that my team and I employed in conducting rapid situational assessments, and what were the key outcomes. Against that backdrop, we note, of course, and this was indicated in the previous presentation, that RSAs are typically employed when we're seeking to get a quick answer or quick understanding of a particular problem within a given setting. It also facilitates the it also facilitates us accessing appropriate intervention strategies and developing recommendations to guide the way forward. So we note that rapid assessments, rapid situational assessments are able to capture information, particularly on data that's hard to obtain either from marginalized populations or, especially in the context of substance use disorder studies, on populations who are hard to access and situations that are constantly evolving. As we know within the drug context, these are definitely characteristics that we have seen popping up over time. RSAs also tend to focus primarily on primary or secondary data sources, and Terry would have elaborated on that. So for this presentation, I will draw insights mainly from two studies that I think would be able to give us a clearer understanding and a clearer perspective of RSAs at work in the field. So these studies, the first one I'm going to draw on would be the synthetic drug study of 2024 and the Youth Diversion Justice and Integration Program study that was conducted in 2025 in Trinidad and Tobago. Just to add some context, the synthetic drug study, that was a wider Caribbean project, and Trinidad and Tobago was one of the participating countries. That being said, the project sought to qualitatively explore the situation of synthetic drugs in Trinidad and Tobago. Given that Trinidad and Tobago has a problem with this particular substance, but the scale and extent of this problem remained unknown. What we were seeing, therefore, was a lot of anecdotal information, but in terms of concrete data and empirical evidence, there was no such thing at that time. So the RSA allowed us to investigate some of those areas in a very quick and rapid approach. In terms of the youth project, on the other hand, this study aimed to identify existing gender-sensitive mechanisms and alternative measures within the criminal justice system for youth who would have committed drug-related offenses and those with substance use disorders. So also another area whereby data was limited. Lots of anecdotal information, but we did not have the depth in terms of academic findings or data or evidence to indicate this is the current situation, and the different key stakeholders and decision makers as well did not have access to that information to guide their next steps, hence the rationale for this project. Moving into some of the key features of RSAs, and this would have also been expanded on in Terry's session, we note that RSAs tend to be quite intensive. And for these two projects that I'm referencing, they were extremely intensive. Our primary data collection actually spanned between 2 weeks to 1 month. And that is a short time frame within the wider research world for conducting these types of engagements. And I must note that they occurred every day during that time. We had interviews sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. So it was pretty intensive. We also note that RSAs employ multi-methods, And both of our studies, so the multi-methods, of course, can be qualitative or quantitative methods. And for both of our studies, we engaged in interviews with key stakeholders using, of course, semi-structured interviews. And we also convened focus group sessions. So some of these key stakeholders, as we noted, can range from law enforcement to social services to practitioners engaged in treatment initiatives to clients, etc. Right? So within our interviews as well as our focus group sessions, we incorporated a wide range of participants from different areas to inform these processes. With regard to the youth project, however, we also analyzed statistical data, and that would have informed our secondary data collection process. Regarding the synthetic drug study, we recall that this was a larger Caribbean effort. So at the Caribbean level, at the regional level, secondary data collection was also conducted. But at the local level, which I was involved in, Trinidad and Tobago, we conducted primarily our data collection in terms of interviews and focus group sessions, which inform primary data sources. In addition, we note that RSAs also tend to be action oriented. So they are focused on a particular problem that requires immediate results. Additionally, they are quite time sensitive, so both projects had really tight time frames for completion. Of course, we had to conform to those parameters, and I'll jump into that a bit more when I get into strengths and challenges. Just briefly examining ethical considerations, this is also a very critical part of RSAs because, as we note, we needed to explain and clearly communicate the goals of our study and the intended outcomes to our respondents. We also needed to be quite clear in terms of the possible risk and benefits of participation. And this in itself is something I'd just like to expand a bit more on as it pertains to clients, because some of the clients that we were trying to engage in this study, many of them assumed that some sort of financial compensation or incentive would have been attached to their participation. However, this was not the case, as it was not envisioned within the project. So, from the onset, during the recruitment of participants stage, we needed to be very, very precise in terms of what are the expected benefits and what are the expected risk of participating in this session. It actually impacted on clients participating in the youth project. So for the synthetic drug study, we had primarily key stakeholders from different areas as it pertained to practitioners and technical experts, and different government organizations being involved, as well as some NGOs. But for our youth project, we also try to incorporate clients, and that was a challenge because many of them, when they realized that that financial incentive was not there, many of them opted out. So, these are definitely things to consider when entering the field, because some of these clients are also financially vulnerable individuals, and an incentive of that nature may have encouraged them or motivated them to participate, given that they would not be able to be engaged in work related activities during that time frame. In addition, we also adhered to the human rights, the basic human rights of the respondents, and we engaged from a do no harm approach, as indicated earlier. Of course, these approaches we had to ensure that they were upheld during all the stages of the research process. So jumping into the fun stuff now in terms of the strengths and challenges of each of these key features of RSAs. We note that yes, it's quick-paced, which means that we have several interviews and sessions going on at the same time simultaneously. But of course, this can lead to the challenge of limited rescheduling options. So often when we see RSAs on paper, it's neat and tidy and looks very much manageable. But once we get into the field, it's a different scenario because things change pretty quickly. And a lot of our stakeholders actually presented with competing priorities. So in terms of rescheduling, because we had such a short time frame for our interviews and focus group sessions, any rescheduling usually became a bit challenging because availabilities and trying to get another slot was definitely something that we encountered in terms of trying to navigate that space. In addition, we note that a key strength of the RSA approach is that multi-methods can be used. And for instance, within our synthetic drug study, we use primarily qualitative methods in terms of our focus groups and our interview sessions, which of course supported cross-referencing what we would have captured with the literature that we would have generated on this particular area as it related to synthetic drugs. In addition, regarding our youth project, we looked at primary data sources in terms of our interviews and focus group sessions, but we also engaged in secondary data collection. And by this, we expanded to look at statistics and data from the police, from the prisons department, and from the probation's services departments. And we also gathered data from treatment centers. So the information that we were getting, that we were capturing within our interviews and focus group sessions, were then cross-referenced with these sources of information, these secondary sources of information. And what did we find? We noted that there were key commonalities in terms of what our stakeholders were indicating, right? But we also recognize some inconsistencies. There were a few inconsistencies. And of course, in determining these inconsistencies, we needed to then emphasize in our findings that additional research should be commissioned in these areas to really drill deeper and determine, which perspective is considered to be the more valid perspective, of course, using different research techniques. The other issue that we also noticed is that triangulation does present, well, not triangulation, but rather RSAs do present with some challenges in terms of its representativeness, particularly if we use qualitative data collection methods alone. So with qualitative data collection methods, there is an issue of generalizability. It is not able, as is the case with quantitative methods, to establish causation. So that is something that, in doing RSAs, you need to be aware of. If it's more a qualitative and quantitative mix, whereby we engage both interviews and focus group sessions, along with surveys, the surveys can facilitate a greater measure of generalizability as opposed to qualitative methods. We also note that with qualitative methods, we're using more purposive sampling approaches as opposed to random sampling approaches, which would also improve some of the objectivity of our findings. In addition, because we captured a cross section of key stakeholders, yes, we would have zoned into different organizations that, based on our literature and interactions with our clients, would have indicated that these are the main individuals to engage. We would still not be able to determine whether these key stakeholders do in fact represent the general population. So representativeness may also be a challenge associated with the RSA approach. That being said, we also note that it does not negate the information being generated from this process. And this RSA approach can, of course, be supplemented by other longer term research initiatives. So, although these issues do present with RSAs, we note that there are limitations, but they do not, in essence, negate the findings or the validity of the findings that we are deriving from this process. RSAs additionally tend to be action oriented. So we're seeing that it's able to generate rich data from diverse sources. So we're getting persons from various sectors to be engaged in the focus group sessions, to be engaged in interviews, and therefore we're able to capture a snapshot of that reality or that point in time. And given, of course, the evolving nature of drug related issues and concerns, this is something that we definitely would need to obtain as we move forward with different decisions, policies, and programs. RSAs also respond to specific data needs. However, on the flip side, we note that the findings of RSAs are not exhaustive, right? Because it does not give us a longitudinal sense, and it is not able, such as with systematic studies, to give us depth in terms of the ability to really probe further and expand on some of the areas that we may arrive at or we may determine during the data collection exercise. In addition, we note that for particularly with the synthetic drug study, that this was a Caribbean exercise. It was a regional exercise. Trinidad was a participant. So in many instances, studies of this nature would employ standardized data collection tools. So in doing this exercise for Trinidad and Tobago, when my team and I, we had to indigenize the tools, the data collection tools, to ensure that it was consistent with our reality, because a blanket approach is useful for comparison. So we held fast to the main areas, but to get a clearer sense of what our reality was, we needed to amend and adjust, make certain adjustments within the data collection tool to ensure that we could have effectively gather the information that we need for our context, while at the same time maintaining that ability to be compared to regional findings. So that's just, some additional bits there in terms of our challenges that may have arisen with RSAs as it pertains to the action-oriented nature. We also note that its RSAs tend to be time sensitive. And of course, the biggest benefit is that we were able to produce rapid results in a very short time frame. As noted, this can certainly be a cost-effective approach, especially when compared to surveys, as our research teams for both projects were engaged for very tight time frames, right? And well, both contracts were generally about 6 months, and everything got done within that time frame. However, we also note that this time sensitivity of RSAs also impacts on the project timelines. Timelines are not very flexible. So that being said, for the youth project, that project was planned out in January of 2025. We had all of our details listed, and in a perfect world, it made perfect sense. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, the end of February or the beginning of March, I believe, a snap election was called. Oh my, what happens now? A lot of our key stakeholders were actually government affiliated individuals. And what happens in a snap election or any type of election circumstance, these persons are usually very much engaged in preparing documents, engaging with different line ministers, etc. So, given our inflexible timeframes, we could not shift our project to a different date. So, what happened? Our project actually coincided with the Trinidad and Tobago's general elections. That was not the plan, but we had to now, as a research team, be very flexible. And that limited rescheduling option that I discussed earlier, yeah, it certainly became a challenge and something that we had to navigate very delicately because we needed to have certain people involved. So sometimes it took us way late into the afternoons or very early mornings just trying to make the appointments on time. So, even the best laid plans, sometimes we come up with unexpected situations and circumstances that can somewhat derail our efforts. But I think the key is to remain very flexible in terms of, okay, this was not planned, but option B. Always have a list of options and alternatives that we can explore in the event that the unexpected happens. Okay, so delving a bit more into our approach and what would have facilitated us to be able to conduct successful RSCs in Trinidad and Tobago, especially within these two projects. I think Terry would have mentioned this, the experience and the training of the team. So our research team is an experienced team. We've done a lot of work in drug-related research as well as other areas. And we have also been trained in the do no harm approach, in the human rights approach. So I think that really assisted us in being able to comprehensively engage this project from a place of knowledge and expertise. That being said, the conceptualization stage is also critically important because RSAs are very precise processes. And sometimes the client that we're working for, or even the environment that we are engaged in, may necessitate so many different areas, information on so many different areas. And oftentimes we find that when there are data needs, there's the expectation that a particular approach or a particular project can address everything, and that is not realistic. So, in the first instance, it's always important to set those parameters with both the client and also with the research team as we engage the context. Okay, so We have a million problems here, we have a million situations evolving, and especially within the drug related environment, we note that issues can come from treatment, from prevention, from resources, from drug use, from the client side. It's multifaceted. So which areas do we zero in on? Which areas do we prioritize for this engagement? And those are critical questions to ask at the very initial stages because it sets the tone for what happens within the entire project. It also sets expectations. So we're going to do A, B, C, D, E. We're not doing F and G, right? And I note, for instance, within our synthetic drug study, that study was very much streamlined. We were looking at synthetic drugs, and that was the main topic. We're looking at, for instance, drug use, we're looking at supply and sale, we're looking at the interventions, existing interventions, what's happening with awareness and sensitization, etc., etc. That was a pretty streamlined, straightforward project because Trinidad was just doing one portion of that exercise. The entire project was actually coming together at the regional level where they would take each country's perspective and now integrate it into a bigger data research finding document. However, with the youth project, that was a little bit different. So it was a broad project. It looked at youth, it looked at their substance use, it looked at youth with drug related offenses, it looked at existing gender sensitive mechanisms within the criminal justice system to deal with youths with drug related offenses and substance use disorders. So it's a lot of moving parts there. And we needed to carefully map which areas would we be focusing on? What would be the priority expectations? What would be the priority outcomes of this exercise? And this is an engagement that is critically important to be convened. So we need to have these discussions with the clients. So the research team and the client commissioning the study needs to definitely at the very initial stages have these conversations and be very clear moving forward in terms of what are the expected objectives, what are the expected outcomes of this exercise. Our approach was also very much grounded in a literature review. So with the synthetic drug study, we did not, the literature review was not extensive because as I indicated, this was being done at the regional level. But to indigenize the instrument to make it appropriate to our context, we still had to do a mini literature review because we cannot go in there tabula rasa and just be like, oh, well, this is an instrument we got from the regional level and we're just going to apply it to our context. So it is still necessary, it was still necessary at that stage to do a mini literature review. Regarding the youth project, however, the literature review was quite intensive and we were also required to develop our data collection instruments. So we note that, of course, it has to be, all of our work has to be grounded in literature, and our findings and recommendations also had to be reviewed against literature. We were also able to build rapport with our participants and gatekeepers, and that also facilitated us accessing hidden and nuanced information. So rapid in our case, and in many cases that these RSAs are conducted, it did not mean rushed or ineffective, but it was actually carefully crafted engagements to ensure that we could produce insightful information that can contribute to underlying structural issues. I also want to just reiterate one issue here because Terry brought this up in his presentation in terms of budget and resources. And it's also very important to ensure that adequate remuneration is available because although RSAs are cheaper than surveys and other types of research efforts, it's not a one-person job. And conducting this level of intensive work within a compressed time frame, therefore necessitates that sort of financial support to ensure a quality product. So what were our main outcomes? I know time is on me, so I'll just wrap this up here in terms of what were our main outcomes. So in terms of what our RSA supported, it definitely supported an understanding of the current context from the perspective of key stakeholders. And these are definitely the individuals who tend to have on the ground experiences and are able to observe and report on what they experience on a day-to-day basis, whether it's from a technical perspective in terms of testing substances, or whether it's from an NGO perspective in terms of interacting with clients, or whether it's from a client perspective itself in terms of what they experience and what they would like to obtain from the system. We were also able to assess cross-sectoral needs, and this was certainly a huge benefit coming out of the RSAs, in addition to which we were able to identify strategies to inform future decisions, policies, and programs. Apart from this, we noted that our RSA responded to existing data gaps. For instance, with our youth project, we were able to inform the development of targeted drug policies and alternative justice programs that consider the unique needs of young individuals. In addition, our key recommendations from our report were actually used to develop a roadmap for future actions. Regarding the synthetic drug study, we were able to assist with defining, measuring, and analyzing the problem of synthetic drugs in Trinidad and Tobago, and the study also responded definitively to existing data gaps, so it filled those gaps. Apart from that, we were able to our studies highlighted the need for additional research, monitoring, evaluation, and data harmonization. So in conclusion, we note that RSAs are in fact able to provide valuable information in very short time frames. They are also a useful strategy for rapid understandings of a problem and developing solutions for future actions. However, given its limitations, we note that RSA should be regarded as one step in the inquiry process, right? It should ideally be complemented with more systematic studies that can further investigate some of the main findings of the RSAs. So that concludes my presentation. I thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll now hand you back over to Purnell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanne, for that very, again, informative presentation, focusing on your practical experience in the field, some of the challenges that you had to overcome, some of the pros and cons. I was very glad to hear you also emphasize the importance of ethics and give a very practical reason why it's important to have informed consent, and to make sure that respondents know what they're getting into. Some of them expected money. You had to be clear up front, okay, there's no money involved or any type of compensation. I also liked the strengths and challenges that you outlined, some very specific strengths and challenges. For example, something as practical as rescheduling an interview can be very, very difficult when you have some time constraints. So thank you for that. You also mentioned something very, very important, and this was an issue I thought that was important because it was raised at an international meeting I attended last year, where someone argued that we have to be very, very careful with replacing traditional epidemiological approaches, school surveys, household surveys, with RSAs. Now, we have never argued, and we're not arguing now, that the RSA approach can replace these types of surveys. Both you and Terence said very clearly that there are some limitations in terms of representativeness, in terms of generalizability of the results of rapid assessment surveys. And you specifically mentioned, Leanne, that RSAs should be thought of as complementary and supportive of these other types of studies. So we're not throwing up the baby with the bathwater. We're not saying switch up everything, change up everything. We're just going to do RSAs going forward. But I think, as Maria said in her opening remarks, and as Terence reiterated, in a context where we are struggling for the resources for these types of things, this type of work is expensive. It is not cheap. And also within the context of a rapidly changing drug market, we have the synthetic drugs, we have the NPS coming on board. We need to look for those innovative methods that we can use to get the data and the information that we need. You also outlined the specifics of the approaches that you took, and I'm happy that you used 2 specific studies and walked us through those studies and told us how you approached it in the field. And you also, just as Terence ended, also sort of linked everything to specific outcomes. What are you doing with the data? What's the idea? What's the purpose? So thank you very much for that presentation, Leanne. Very, very informative. So at this stage, we have some time. We have a few minutes for questions and answers. So as Paula said in the beginning, please type your questions if you have any in the chat, and I will read them to the appropriate panelists. And I will start with the first one that I have here, which is from Wendell Wallace. I'll read it because it's pretty long. So Terry, Leanne, feel free to jump in. Good morning, all. This is a very interesting webinar, as not much is known on RIS by persons outside of the social sciences. My question is the RIS the same as rapid qualitative research and evaluation approach? I'm not familiar with that particular and specific methodology, but he asks, is the RIS the same as rapid qualitative research and evaluation approach? And he also went on to say that during the COVID-19 pandemic, I submitted a research article to a local legal journal. The article was rejected on the following ground: the brevity of time for the collection of data and analysis drawn can lead to inherent unreliability. The article was resubmitted to an international journal and was accepted. I am in support of rapid assessment surveys, especially during pandemics or when there is need for rapid, and I'm losing my thing here, rapid assessment, I think it says. Keeping in mind the need for rigor and reliability. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, Terence and Leanne. It sounds to me that, and we don't know all the details of this particular case, but maybe the local legal journal was unfamiliar with the rapid assessment survey methodology and wrote it off as inadequate. I have no idea. I don't think Wendell is here to get more context, but the fact that he submitted the same thing to an international journal and it was accepted shows that there may be some differences in the level of understanding between the local, and I'm not sure where Wendell is from. Maybe someone can let me know. But let me hear your thoughts, Terence or Leanne.
Okay, I think I
Go
can
ahead.
jump in.
Go ahead,
So
Leanne.
Dr. Wallace is he's from Trinidad and Tobago. He's a criminologist, and he's done
Mhm.
quite a lot of interesting work in this area. Because as you indicated, we don't have all the information surrounding this situation. But what I could say is that some journals tend to be very qualitative in nature and some tend to be very quantitative in nature. That has been my experience. And the very quantitative ones may not be too inclined with the rapid situational assessments. They may be more inclined with the rapid survey approaches, which lean towards the quantitative side. In addition, I would think that because it's a legal journal, and this is something we actually did with our youth paper, our youth project, we delved heavily into the legislation. So we compared the legislation to what we were doing as well in the interviews, the data that we got from the interviews and the focus group sessions. So I'm not sure if his project would have done something like that to increase the rigor of the findings, or whether it was just interviews and focus group sessions, or what was the method of data collection employed with the study that he would have engaged in. So it would have been useful to hear a bit more in terms of his strategy and approach, but these are just my preliminary ideas on it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Leanne. Terrence?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into what some of the issues Leanne discussed, but in terms of some of the other things that he spoke about, it was done during COVID. COVID presented us all some really useful tools that to today we're still capitalizing on, like all of the webinars and everything else. And if you really think about some of the primary data collection, the qualitative primary data collection methods, particularly in-depth interviews and focus groups, those too can be done over the internet. And so when you think about one of the reasons why, the suggested reasons that you can use a rapid situation assessment for, it's crisis. Okay. And I think we'll all agree COVID was a crisis. And we had this saying in the past with epidemiologists, when we have a crisis, epidemiologists tend to come with the woodwork like worms, because it's just so many things that we need to study to prepare us, God forbid, for the next one. But I think he was spot on. Generally speaking, peer-reviewed journals are extremely strict on what they accept for publication, and it could be, and which is saying the same thing Leanne said, just in a different way. So it could be that, but I think his was a good example of the usefulness of the tool during a period of crisis. And I'm going to tell you, I was just chatting with Liz. One of the things we as drug practitioners need to do is piggyback on where our policymakers and decision makers are putting the money, which is in crime and violence. And when you look at the association between drugs and crime and violence, we should be piggybacking on them. And you think about the rapid assessment tool and what this could do for, again, investigating issues related to crime and violence, which also is related to drugs, because we have so many of the same risk and protective factors. You need to be capitalizing on that. But that's my 5 cents on that matter.
Thank you, Terrence. And I agree with you. I agree with both of you. And the idea of piggybacking, I think is important. I think, was it you that said, in terms of the resource allocation between supply and demand, there's always this imbalance? Well, maybe we give them something that is mutually beneficial, and we all can move forward on that. I think we have someone requesting the floor. So if you want to request the floor and ask a question, you may do so as well at this point in time. I think Uki Atkinson from Jamaica has requested the floor. Uki, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Good morning, colleagues. Just confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, loudly and clearly.
Okay,
Right.
great. It's not really a question, it's more a comment. First of all, just to say thanks to Terry and Leon for those very good presentations. What I wanted to do was just to confirm the utility and value of rapid situation assessments, which we've seen here in Jamaica. In the past 10 years, we've done a number of them, wide and varied in nature. For instance, post decriminalization of cannabis in 2015, we did a rapid situation assessment, context related, qualitative in nature, to determine how do we approach prevention programs, a particular prevention program on cannabis with secondary school students. And that rapid situation assessment helped us to form the basis of a peer-led prevention program. Fast forward to 2017, after we did our national drug prevalence survey, the household survey, we did a resource and intervention and policy service gap rapid assessment. So we went to service providers, policymakers to be able to look deeper into the contextual realities of the results that we were seeing. Fast forward 2022, post COVID, we did a rapid assessment among secondary school students after they returned to school. And this is where we found out that, MDMA had become popular, and it also formed the basis for advocacy for the 2023 national survey, which we did. So we used that rapid assessment to advocate for the need for a broader national, much more methodologically sound, representative study, which formed our population survey. And then, of course, we were a part of the 2024 synthetic drug study, which was done in 4 countries, Trinidad, Barbados, Guyana, and Trinidad. And this really helped us to identify the gaps in terms of legislation and policy, the treatment and clinical response gaps, detection of synthetic drugs, surveillance, all of the gaps, institutional capacity. So I'm just saying, I just would like to confirm that yes, rapid assessments with all of their slight limitations, I would say, they're really a really good stepping stone for countries to be able to determine what's going on. It can provide a clear pathway for data needs as well as interventions and advocacy in particular, because with all of the assessments that we've done, we don't keep the data to ourselves. We have disseminated it to decision makers, and out of that have come tangible actions. So I just wanted to give Jamaica's experience and confirm to colleagues that this approach really works, and we've seen it here. Thank you.
Before you run out, before you disconnect, Uki, what this may sound like a silly question because of what you just said, but so why has Jamaica clearly adopted this methodology as a routine way of collecting data, generating information on drugs? Why did you choose this method?
I would say because we understand and appreciate the value of not only having the numbers and the scope of what's going on in country, but also getting the qualitative, going deeper, getting the contextual reality. I believe that rapid assessments not only, okay, so we can do a national survey that, among secondary schools and nationally, every year or every 2 years, but we can go into the field and we can determine what is happening by talking to people, doing focus groups, doing key informant interviews. So we recognize the value of that very early, and we have been utilizing it because there is value in it.
Have you gotten better at it?
I would say yes. I mean, there's one more that I didn't mention. We did a rapid assessment 2 years ago on vaping among both primary and secondary school students, and that led to a whole campaign, anti-vaping campaign. So we use the data. So I think we've gotten better at it because we don't only use the quantitative data to inform what we're doing, programs, policies, the data from rapid assessments to inform our interventions and programs as well.
All right. Thank you very much for your intervention. That was very, very useful. Thank you. Leanne, I see you have your hand up. You can go ahead and intervene. And then we have a question in the chat that I'll get.
Okay, is it the Q&A? Because I was going to draw your attention to that. There's a question in Q&A from Stokey. Okay,
Yes,
all
yes,
right,
yes. So
great.
the referencing the same. So you can stay on. You can be the first to answer that question. Referencing that question, what sampling, and this is from Stokey Tedeschi. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. What sampling strategies work best when a full sampling frame is unavailable? That's right in you and Terrence's wheelhouse. So go.
All right, so definitely once a full sampling frame is unavailable, probability-based sampling techniques will not be suitable in that context. So what would be needed would be non-probability type sampling techniques. So for our case, we use purposive sampling. Snowball sampling can also be used, whereby you interact with one person and they refer you to another person and you build a snowball effect. So yeah, I think those non-probability techniques would be best suited in instances like that.
Thank you very much, Terrence.
Yeah, I think it was Leanne was spot on with her answer to the question. But again, for something like that, it's easy to answer that if we're doing some sort of scientific survey. But in something like a rapid situation assessment, bear in mind what we're bringing to bear in a rapid situation assessment. That will come to play if we're looking at some of the quantitative supporting information that we're getting, and we're primarily going after that supportive quantitative information because a lot of times what we're seeking would have been attained from administrative data collected by institutions. But for whatever reason, if that information is not available, or as an informant that we cannot use, then we can talk about doing some sort of quantitative survey. Now, I think in a presentation, Leanne alluded to the fact that you have to keep in mind that the reliability, and I start teaching again, but the reliability or the reproducibility of the results, okay? If you repeat what you did, you may not see the same results simply because it's not representative, all right? But it informs us. And we also need to understand that, where Leanne specifically spoke about recommendations for additional research coming out of research. Well, as an epidemiologist, I would make sure that every time we do a research report, I'm looking for business to go on. There should always be a recommendation for further research coming out of research. In a particular question, you have to look specifically at what she is trying to get a sample of. But generally speaking, in these types of survey, you're not going to get a representative sample. And so the reliability of the results will always be questioned. In terms of the options, I think Leanne already said it. We also need to understand in the interpretation of those results, 20% of what you see in the sample is more than likely is not going to reflect 20% in the population from which the sample was taken, which again is the reliability and the reducibility. So it's also how you use. I always tell persons what you're seeing coming out of these non-representative samples is only suggestive. That's it, all right? And so in terms of looking at what you come up with as gospel, don't do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Terrence and Leanne. I agree with both of you. Yes, I think someone gave the pronunciation Tedeschi, Stokey. Yeah, so the idea behind the rapid assessment survey is, as both Terrence and Leanne said, you're using multiple sources of data, multiple data collection methods. Having a full sample frame is usually more associated with a traditional epidemiological survey, and less so with the rapid assessment survey. So it is less of a concern, not completely not a concern, but it's less of a concern for the rapid assessment survey. But Leanne and Terrence both explained how you could get around that, non-probability sampling methods, convenience sampling, etc. You could use those approaches to get the information that you need. Okay, so I am not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to give the floor to Terrence for some last words and then Leanne for some last words. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Cornell. Let me just lower my hand here. Because the rapid assessment technology depends so much on administrative data, I really want to stress, I don't want you to be skeptical about government data, whether it's official or not, but I need you to understand that it's not always what it's cracked up to be. Too often, data coming out of the institutions when we can access it, or information coming up, is based on incomplete data. And you may not know this if they're sending you annual data. But when you start to dig into it, it's not truly reflective of what you would like to have coming out of these institutions. And so just be very, very careful. And when we're looking at secondary data, particularly with previous surveys, if it's possible, if you can get the methodology or the metadata that was used, get that, because you also need to be very, very clear about what was being asked in those surveys. So you can actually interpret that information correctly as well. And so, just paying attention to the quality of the information that you get. I really want to stress that, okay? And but utilize the method, because it's really, really helpful. It can help to explain some things that you would have seen in quantitative surveys, and it also could point to the need for more quantitative surveys. But any data that you use, try to find out about as much about it as you possibly can.
Thank you very much, Terrence. Leanne?
Okay, thanks, Pinal. And just in closing, I want to reiterate that based on our experiences, I know sometimes it's not always feasible due to time and perhaps even finances. Sorry, I think I
You're
was
muted,
muted there by
Leanne.
mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, based on our experience, I know it's not always feasible due to time and financial resources allocated to the project, but I think that triangulation is a key strength of RSAs, and the incorporation of not just interviews and focus group sessions and surveys, but also access and analysis of secondary data. It really helps increase the validity and accuracy of findings coming out of RSAs, because you're able to compare and cross-reference the information within two two different types of data sources or more. So I think that is a strength that should be honed in using this approach. And of course, do not see it as a one-stop shop, see it as something building along the research continuum. So thanks so much.
Uh, Thank you very much, Leanne. Before I just do a few quick words to wrap up, have you ever encountered a situation where your triangulation efforts have led to more confusion, where the different sources are just saying different things and you can't bring them together? I mean,
Yes,
I don't know.
yes,
Okay.
yes, I have. And in instances like that, that in itself is a clear indication of the need for additional research because now we do not have coherence in terms of findings. So what do we do? One, both sources cannot be accurate, so we need to delve a bit deeper to determine the true nature of what we're trying to understand. So that in itself is a justification for additional research that comes out of RSCs.
Um,
Perfect response.
Let me, I'll
Go ahead,
answer that.
Terry. Go
So,
ahead, Terry.
and I'll answer that with an example. Um, a number of years ago, I was asked to um, look at a violence prevention program and basically see how the program was doing after persons were trained to implement this program. And when we looked at the numbers, the numbers didn't make sense given that in Grand Bahama, the instances of violence in the schools were known to be high. So when I was down there on an environmental project, I took a day and went to talk to three principals in high schools down in Grand Bahama. And one of the questions was, in terms of your reporting of instances of violence, okay, what is reported, what is recorded? One said, I record and report everything. Another one, whoops. Can you hear me?
Yeah, keep going, Terry. We're just putting
Okay.
up the
All right.
we're just
Yeah.
putting up the evaluation. You keep
Right.
going.
Another one said they only report instances of violence when the police is called. And the third one said they only report serious instances. So these were schools involved in the violence prevention program. We're supposed to be looking at pre and post. They were exposed to the program, and then we're supposed to be looking to see how it was done. Obviously, at the planning phase, they did not make provisions for how they were going to measure change. But more importantly, think about when we tried to compare schools. One only reports when the police is called, one report everything, and the other one reports serious instances. Of course, I asked for the serious instances. You know, she said if somebody get hurt bad, okay? And so the school numbers was not adding up with what the police was telling us, okay? And so yeah, it was a problem, all right? And you know, I had to tell the director of education, the permanent secretary, look, what is your policy? And if you don't have one, this is the time you need to come up with a policy and make sure that the schools are carrying it out. Because violence in schools ain't going nowhere. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Terrence. I think so Leanne said that that situation may indicate a need for further research, which I completely agree with. The example you gave, Terrence, I think the dichotomy, the fact that you were getting so much different information, that is the result. I think that showed that there was no fidelity in the actual implementation of the program. So yeah, so in both those ways, I think that was something that was very, very important. So again, to reiterate what Maria said when she opened, you know, we know that the drug problem is changing rapidly, not only in our sub-region, but across the Americas, across the world. We have a serious lack of resources for our traditional epidemiological surveys, our household surveys, our school surveys. Some of the surveys in the countries participating here are quite old and no longer reliable. What do? We need to look for innovative methods. We need to look for ways to get the information and data that we need. The National Drug Observatories, we can't just shut up shop and go home. We have to still fulfill the role that we were created to do. One of the ways you can do that is the rapid assessment survey, the rapid situational assessment methodology. We think it is ideally suited for the times that we are in now. Low resource, highly rapidly changing environment. The rapid situational assessment is perfectly placed to respond to that type of situation. We heard in the case of Jamaica that they've been able to adopt this methodology and they've been using it quite often over the past few years. I know there are other countries. I know Barbados does it. I know Grenada does it as well. They have used this type of approach to inform, first of all, to understand a problem that is emerging, and then to inform their response to the problem. So we want to encourage all of the countries here to consider the RAS approach to collecting data. I want to thank Terrence and Leanne. Your presentations were phenomenal. Thank you for pulling these together and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And if any of the participants here today want to get in touch with these good folks, we'll be happy to share their contact details with you. And we will share a PDF copy of their presentations to you as well, so you have the information to hand. Before you go, please use your wonderful smartphones, take a photo of the QR code that you see on the screen. Please fill out that evaluation that we prepared. It's very, very short. It's going to take you less than 5 minutes, so that we can get some feedback from you on how you found this event to be. Terrence, Leanne, thank you both very, very much. As I said, you were fantastic. I'd like to thank all of the participants who took the time out to join us today for this event. And we look forward to seeing more of you utilizing this methodology. You can rely on CCAD, of course, the OID, to provide technical support. We're not always going to have the finances. That's a challenge for all of us. But certainly when it comes to the technical support that you need, we will always be there to provide that for you. So with that, I want to thank all of you and wish you all a good rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Did everybody have a chance to fill out the evaluation? Please click on it, fill out the evaluation. We'll keep the screen up for a little while so that you'll have the opportunity to do that before you go.